Welcome back to the Theory Creep. I'm the Theory Creep, and today we're going to be creeping through another episode of Aqua Teen Hunger Force. It's one of my personal favorites, episode 100.
So you're Aqua Unit Patrol Squad now?
Afraid so, yeah.
Really? That's what you're going with?
Now, of all the episodes of Aqua Teen Hunger Force I could have chosen, I feel like this is probably one of the most postmodern, one of the most fourth wall breaking episodes. So in that ways, it's kind of the low-hanging fruit. I want to say it's like a genre bending episode, but it's not really, because while the form of the show does change halfway through it, and we'll get into that, the genre doesn't really change. It stays in the horror, comedy, cartoon kind of world. But it is fragmented. The show is broken up into unrelated, distinct parts, as many Aqua Teen episodes are. But in this one, it's super obvious.
We're gonna solve mysteries, and we live in Seattle now, where I think I also host a radio program.
So do you have a commitment beyond the pilot?
I don't know any more than you do, man. We think about losing a dog. I don't know what that means.
Because I think this works.
And we're going to tie these postmodern metatextual themes to a new theorist for this channel, Levinas, Emmanuel Levinas. I got to say, I'm not super familiar with him. I've only read a few of his books, but I've enjoyed what I have encountered. And I think, in particular, totality and infinity refers very well to this episode, so that's the theorist we're going to be bringing in to this reading of Aqua Teen Hunger Force. So without further ado, let's get this theory creep train choo-chooing. 100, the 100th episode of Aqua Teen, is super postmodern, and it would be very easy to just outline the points of connection between the show's form and a theorist like Levinas. But that's super low-hanging fruit, so I'd like to do a little bit more than that. I'd like to show you how theories like Levinas's and shows like Aqua Teen actually arm us to deal with the forces that assail us in the postmodern world. I want to show how these theories are useful on a day-to-day practical kind of basis. The thesis for this episode, and I don't give you a coherent thesis statement often enough, so I'm sorry about that, but there's one for this episode, and it is Aqua Teen Hunger Force is training for the postmodern world. Ha! There we go. This episode is about something. It's about how if you watched Aqua Teen Hunger Force as a kid, you probably thought you were wasting your time, but you weren't. It was helping you, or it will help you in adult life to deal with the complexities of the postmodern digital age. So the fourth wall breaking in the show is fragmentary. It breaks Aqua Teen up into a bunch of different things, and we'll list them later, but fundamentally it breaks Aqua Teen up into the show and the creation of the show. So it separates internality, the kind of internally consistent reality of the show, where they live in South Jersey in, a house and their fast food, and then the externality of the show, where there are producers and executives and voice actors who have to pitch ideas to people. Traditionally, a meta-narrative exists outside of the narrative, right? You've got a story, and then you've got the story outside of the story about the creation of the story. Meta-narratives are super common in postmodern literature, and Aqua Teen is by no means unique for utilizing one in this episode. And the reason they're so common in postmodern literature, television, film, whatever postmodern genre you want to talk about, is because meta-narratives undermine the supremacy of the internal. So let's break that down a little bit. We tend to think that the truth of our being, that the reality of our existence lies inside of us. The soul, the mind, the brain, whatever you want to call it. And it's not just about ourselves. We also tend to think that we have to burrow into a subject to better understand it. That from the outside, we don't really understand something, and we have to get inside it in order to, get our heads around it. But in a meta-narrative, this isn't the case, right? When you have a meta-narrative like a play within a play, like in Hamlet, the reality of the play is not as real as the external reality outside of the play. So in the case of Aqua Teen, the show is not real. The show is a performance. The reality of the show is external to the show. The reality of the show is the production process that makes the show, but it's not in the show. So meta-narratives, just by their existence, undermine the supremacy of internality, undermine the supremacy of the subjective, and embrace the objective. Now, this is useful for us as watchers of Aqua Teen Hunger Force or consumers of postmodern art in general, because truth in the world is not singular. It's pluralistic and complicated. There's all kinds of angles that you can look at it from, and it's not singular or discrete. And when we think about truth as internal, well, the thing about interiority is that it's singular. And that's the one thing that truth isn't in the postmodern world. So when we see truth as exterior instead of interior, we're more prone or we're more able to understand truth as a kind of pluralistic, multifaceted thing, which I think is much closer to our experience of truth in our daily lives. Now, this brings us to Levinas, but before we dive into Levinas, I'd like to watch a few clips from 100. Okay, so in this clip, Shake is the only one who seems to be aware that they are in a show.
Howdy, Papa, sir. Aqua Teen? Well, where's that?
100 episodes. That's the magic number for syndication cash.
What are you talking about, Shay?
You don't read the trades?
He's isolated. He has the subjective perspective. The objective reality of the show is contained within the show. The show doesn't know that it's a show in this scene. So why does this matter? Well, it doesn't really. It just shows that the show is playing with these concepts. Truth is outside of reality. Truth is subjective. It's inside Shake. But as we'll see, what's inside Shake, what's isolated in him in this scene, will soon become the reality of the entire show.
You told me this was episode 3, which means I've been doing episode 3 for 8 friggin' years.
Actors just get so immersed in their characters that they lose track of time and space.
How dare you talk to me about my craft? 100 episodes is syndication. That's where I cash in. I know it and you know it.
The show's 11 minutes long, so really you only have 50 half hours.
So this boardroom scene is the second fragment in the episode. The first third or so of the episode takes place within the Aqua Teen world, and then there's another fragment outside of it in this boardroom production setting, and then there's another fragment at the end that we'll get to shortly. So this is an expanding of interiority, right? What started as Shake's subjective perspective has become the objective reality of the show. So this represents a kind of conflict or tension between subjective and objective. What started as the subjective perspective of Shake, the knowledge that he's in a show, which was contained within him, has now expanded into the greater reality of the show. The show has accepted that there's this other layer to it. There's the nugget of show surrounded by the chocolatey layer of meta show, the show about making a show. And Shake comes back into the reality of the subjective, into the limited interiority of the show, with the awareness that he's in a show, and he just tries to cruise through it. He's like, look, let's just phone in the next 100 episodes and just retire in comfort.
Where you been for like 3 days?
Hey, let's just joke around and entertain 18 to 34-year-olds, shall we? Pick a card. Any card. Come on, pick one.
I can't be doing that. Frylock's out front mowing the number 100 into the lawn.
But Meatwad is kind of stuck between Shake and Frylock. Frylock is 100% immersed In the reality of the show, he thinks the number 100 is going to kill him. Meatwad is kind of an outside perspective looking in on Shake's objectivity versus Frylock's subjectivity. So that's enough for Aqua Teen for now. There's a few more clips that I want to get to, but let's go to Levinas and start to talk about his theory a little bit, and we'll see how they connect, how Aqua Teen and Levinas connect as the video progresses, hopefully. So Levinas said that being is exteriority. And this is an obvious deconstruction. It's an obvious reversal, right? We tend to think that being is interior, that the truth of our existence, as I mentioned earlier, resides inside of us. And this interiority is also associated with subjectivity. Exteriority, on the other hand, is objective, supposedly. And what I mean by subjective objective is that we tend to assume that there's this world outside of us that is separated from us that we see from our limited subjective perspective. So like right now, I can't see what's behind me, but I assume there's an objective world behind me, even though I can't see it from my subjective perspective. And Levinas is contaminating subject and object, as well as interior and exterior. But he's also contaminating the pair like vertically as well as horizontally. It's a chiasmic theory. I'll throw a picture. I don't know what side, but I'll throw a picture up behind me that shows what I mean. Basically, you've got subjective and objective being contaminated this way, and then you've got subjective and interior and objective and exterior being contaminated this way. And you can see that Aqua Teen is doing something very similar, especially with the scene that we just watched. Shake is subjective, and then he's objective. Frylock is crazy at first. He's just making up like numerological bullshit. But it's revealed that no, he's actually in the 100th episode. Frylock is actually correct that the number 100 is going to try to kill them, as we'll see later on. So Aqua Teen is really dramatizing what Levinas is doing, but let's move on with what Levinas is actually doing, because we've only just started talking about that. So the 3-word kind of elevator pitch for Levinas is being is exteriority. That's what he's doing in the passage that we're working with, which comes at the end of totality and infinity. So he warns us of 2 possible misreadings of being is exteriority. So first, he doesn't want us to think that he wants to abolish the illusions of the subjective. Because, he says, if you do that, if you say that subjective perspectives are illusions, that we don't have the truth from our limited, unique point of view, we actually abolish the external world as well. Because if we aren't accessing truth subjectively, then there's nothing unique or special about our subjective perspective. It just becomes part of the confused miasma of the objective material world. And thus interior becomes exterior, and the distinction between the two kind of stop to matter. So Levinas is not saying that the subjectivity is irrelevant or an illusion. And he's also not saying that subjectivity is inherently unmixable. Like, he says that subjectivity isn't an illusion because if it is, then we would be mixing subjectivity and objectivity and kind of destroying the nuances between the two. And he also says that it's not impossible to mix the two. He says that the subjective is not insoluble within the objective. So what he's saying there is that there's not a distinct objective and subjective. It's not that these are 2 entities that are truly discrete, that can't be mixed. Because he says even if that were the case, it wouldn't be the case, because a third perspective, like an outsider looking panoramically at objective and subjective, even if they can't mix, is going to see both of them as part of the same system. Objective and subjective will be right next to each other from a third perspective. And from this third perspective, Levinas says, we could see the play between objective and subjective, and we would see that they're really just part of the same system. Now, this third space position or point that Levinas is making really reminds me of the scene we just watched from Aqua Teen, where you have the extremely objective Shake, who is extremely aware of the world around him and the fact that he's an actor in a show. And then you have Frylock, who's extremely subjective. His perspective is very narrow. And it seems like they really can't interact. But Meatwad offers us this third position that's kind of aware of both of them and kind of has one foot in each camp. Again, just kind of a superficial, formal similarity between the stuff that Levinas talks about and the stuff that Aqua Teen puts on screen. So after outlining those two possible misreadings of being is exteriority, Levinas introduces a new pair to the chiasmic relationship we were talking about earlier. Now he starts talking about falseness and truth. Now, normally it would work like this if we wanted to keep working with these kind of visual pairings. You'd have falseness, which is kind of associated with the material, especially from a Platonic perspective. The world is just like a shadow of the true world. And then you have truth, which, again, in the Platonic understanding of things, is inside of us. We are from the world of the forms. The world of the forms is subjective. It's out there. It's unrelated to us. It's not present. I don't know. Anyway, so that's what you've got there. But this is the assembly that Levinas is trying to disrupt. If being is exteriority, then the truth of our being is outside of us in this murky, unintelligible world that we only ever have this very limited understanding of.
Episode 100, and if we finish this show, you'll collect our episodes forever. I don't know. I'm just what I say. Speculating.
Show? What do you mean show?
Hello? The last 9 years, these friggin' Meatwad and the Knick-Knack beanies, but they're still available at adultswimshop.com.
What the hell are you talking about, fool?
They sell all our stuff for more than you can buy in other places. Look, just follow me if you want to live.
So this scene of Aqua Teen is really the moment of truth. It's the reveal moment where Frylock and Meatwad finally understand Shake's perspective and the truth of the show, which is that it is a show. The fact that this is represented as just white light kind of smashing into their world is pretty typical of representations of the objective, representations of true reality. And this isn't really what Levinas is saying, right? Levinas is saying that truth is exterior. He's not saying that truth is this like unknowable white kind of unseeable presence. He's saying that truth is in the world. It's in the material exterior world. So I guess this is really an instance of Aqua Teen using like a film trope that heaven is just this white light.
You have the divine spark. You have the gift for bringing joy and laughter to the world. I know, I created you. Quit bragging. See, that's what I'm talking about.
This is the construct. It's our loading program. We can load anything from clothing to equipment, weapons, training simulations, anything we need.
You're right. The nothingness looks, feels, and bounces like tofu, which, ironically, tastes like nothing.
Maybe we can forgive them for slipping out of the postmodern framework for a second. So this is a good opportunity to bring up a third potential misreading that Levinas warns us of. When we're thinking about exteriority as being is exteriority, we shouldn't assume that exteriority has truth to the detriment of the subjective, of interiority. Again, like the first misreading, we're not trying to do away with the illusions of the subjective. We're not trying to say that exteriority is truth and interiority is falseness. Levinas says, exteriority is not true in a lateral view, apperceiving it in its opposition to interiority. It is true in a face-to-face that is no longer entirely vision, but goes further than vision. So we're going to get into this vision further than vision business in a second, but for now, I think we can focus on the face-to-face part of this quote. So exteriority is true, not in opposition to interiority, but with interiority. It's when the two mix that we really see truth, if you ask Levinas. So to go back to the meatwad in the middle, Shake as objective, Frylock as subjective kind of triad, Levinas, I think, would probably locate truth with meatwad, where these two positions contaminate in this kind of third space. This is essentially a mixing of presence and absence. The exterior is essentially outside of me, but if my being is exterior to me, then my being is essentially absent from me, right? I am not exterior. That's the definition of exterior. But if my being is exterior, then I am other to myself. And it sounds like nonsense, right? Like that I am othered to myself, that I'm absent from my own being. But it's not, right? Like again, to keep things concrete, let's look at what I'm doing right now and what you're doing right now. I am presenting myself to a camera, uploading it onto my computer, putting it on the internet, and hoping that people watch it. You are watching what I have to say on your screen, hopefully. I'm simultaneously absent in your space and present in your space, right? Like I'm not there. My being is my physical body is obviously not in your space, but my being is in your space. There's an absence and a presence in what's going on right now. Likewise, there's an absence and a presence in my room right now. Ooh, I just got goosebumps. Yeah, like you're here and you're not, right? Like you're watching what I'm saying, and there's also no one in the room watching what I'm saying. There's a presence and an absence to my audience right now. So these postmodern cliches, the othering of myself, whatever, the separation of myself from myself, like these ideas sound abstract, but they're actually super relevant to our day-to-day lives. And as the digital world gets more and more pervasive and we engage with it more and more, I think these postmodern ideas become more and more useful to us.
Man, how long do we have to do this?
Relax. We got like 9 more minutes left. We'll just go till the credits hit.
Okay, so at this point in the Aqua Teen episode, everyone is aware that they're in a show.
Meaty, meaty, moo. And meaty, meaty, moo to you too.
The show knows that it's a show. It started to imitate other shows quite intentionally. It's, essentially a Scooby-Doo parody.
Patrol Squad, solving mysteries, what you do. Aqua Unit Patrol Squad, look out before you jump about you.
Which brings us to the aforementioned third fragment in this show. So let's just review them real quick. You've got the standard Aqua Teen episode. You've got the meta episode that happens around the standard Aqua Teen episode. And then you've got this third outside meta parody episode where Aqua Teen is really kind of making fun of itself, right? Like it's always been a cartoon horror parody, and here we are again in Scooby-Doo, a comedy horror cartoon. It doesn't seem like they've gone very far. Also, unless I'm mistaken, I'd have to look this up, but I feel like Scooby-Doo was a Hanna-Barbera cartoon, which is where Adult Swim started as like recycling of Hanna-Barbera clips and animation little blocks. And anyway, that's not really a part of this conversation. So why are we talking about fragments? Well, honestly, because reality is fragmented. Reality is broken up into these like indistinct, unconnected moments that we have to string a narrative between in order for our lives to make sense. If we didn't connect the dots of our life, it would just be like a bunch of disconnected, unintelligible crap on the floor. Truth is also fragmented, right? There is no singular truth. When we try to find the reality of a subject, it's very, very hard to nail it down. There's always another perspective to consider. There's always another side to the coin. So shows that embrace fragmentary narratives prepare us, maybe as children, maybe as teenagers, who knows, maybe as adults. They prepare us for the fragmented nature of reality. So Levinas is really into light metaphors, like lenses and reflections and crystals and prisms. He really likes talking about distortion. And unsurprisingly, he associates this distortion with truth. He says, "The truth of being is not the image of being or the idea of its nature. It is the being situated in a subjective field which deforms vision, but precisely thus allows exteriority to state itself. This curvature of the intersubjective space inflects distance into elevation. It does not falsify being," and this is important, "but makes its truth first possible." So what Levinas is saying is that in order for truth to exist, it needs to be deformed. We need to have a skewed perspective of the objective in order to have any kind of truth. Usually we would say that deformation or obscurity is an indicator of untruth or falsity. But I think, especially in the postmodern world, it's just a characteristic of understanding. We always have to deal with this askew perspective. We're always looking through a glass darkly. Okay, we're getting pretty far into the clock. I think, I mean, I'm not sure how long this will edit down to, but at this point I've been talking for an hour or so. So it's going to be hard to get this down to under half an hour to ideally 20 minutes. But I want to talk about one more thing before we stop. The ending of 100 leads the audience to believe that the show is canceled. That the new version of Aqua Teen, Aqua Unit Patrol Squad, or whatever it is they call it, is not to be anymore. The producer, says that it's just like another project that they're doing and that they're not really interested in picking it up. And Dana starts pitching other ideas. But of course, this isn't the case. Aqua Teen would go on for many more years.
Come in any time to bore us. My door is always open.
I could come back after 3. I got a space pirate thing I'm making up right now.
Okay. How do I say this?
I was just going to get a bag of pretzels at the vending machine.
Everything you say bores us. You know what I mean?
Do you have 75 cents? I don't have any change.
There's no certainty in the objective world or in the meta-narrative of Aqua Teen either, right? Just like how Levinas wants us to see that truth comes from the interplay between subjective and objective, from interior and exterior. In Aqua Teen, the truth comes from Meatwad, or Meatwad's position outside of subjective and objective. Because when we're occupying the objective world, when the producers cancel Aqua Teen in this episode, the show isn't canceled, right? It continues on. And a lot of the characteristics of this imagined show get carried into the future of the show. For example, they move to Seattle. The show takes place in Seattle. It takes on the name of this show, which was apparently canceled at the end of this episode. So we can't rely on the exterior, we can't rely on the objective, and we can't rely on the subjective. All we have is this interplay, this deformation, this askewing of light. So they probably told you back in high school when you were huffing on your bong in your parents' basement that you were wasting your time with all those cartoons. But now you can look them in the eye and you can say, "Nuh-uh, no way, sir. The theory creep told me I was training myself for the postmodern condition." That's right, all those cartoons and drugs, they kept your mind supple and flexible, ready for the postmodern digital world. And now that we're at the edge of civilization and everything's crumbling around you and growing more chaotic by the day, hell, you might even pull into the lead, my stoner friends. Anyway, that's it for me for this week. Tune in next week for more Theory Creepin'. I'm the Theory Creep. This is the Theory Creep. Over and out.